President Bola Tinubu has been on something like a shuttle diplomacy, first to India, where he attended a G20 meeting, and then to the United Arab Emirates to consult with the authorities over there over a visa ban clamped on Nigerians wishing to visit the country. In the course of that time, it has emerged that the Nigerian leader closed out a couple of deals in Abu Dhabi, which may be of immense economic benefit to Nigerians, at least in the immediate term. Well, now we are being joined by the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Professor Eghosa Osaghae, to take a look at the gains, or otherwise, of President Tinubu's many visits. Many thanks for joining us this afternoon, and welcome to Newsday. Well, Professor Eghosa Osaghae, if you can hear me, just let us know. And also, we want to know what, in your opinion, could be the gains of these trips that have just been made by President Tinubu. What is the end game for us as ordinary Nigerian citizens?
Well, I'm sure that Nigerians must be counting the blessings and dividends of the president's most recent trips. The point is that we're getting a new impetus for the whole dimension of our foreign policy that belongs to economic diplomacy. I think the point has been made, cannot be overemphasized, that the economic foundation, of all that we are hoping to do with our external relations, is very key. So I think, what the president has done in his most recent trips must be seen in that light. First, for the G20, the invitation to Nigeria was an acknowledgement of the fact that, Nigeria is not only an emerging economy, as membership of that body has been defined, but Nigeria is Africa's biggest economy. And that acknowledgement is very key. Second, the fact that, it also offered the opportunity to extend the frontiers of Nigeria's investment drive, foreign direct investment and so on, the kinds of meetings that took place by the side of that meeting of the G20, the kinds of gains and the promises that came by way of direct investment. That's very key. Again, we have been on the point of diversifying our economic mainstay in the country, everything that can take us, to the fringes of non-oil and non-gas, extensions would be very helpful. So I think, the talks about those investments, the opportunities, the meetings he had with great world leaders, the American president, the Prime Minister of India, the EU president, and so very many heads of state and people in the private sector, those were very key. And, the composition of the Nigerian delegation to the meeting also tells us, the very strong things that our president was doing in India. By the time you add to that the visit to, the UAE and the concessions and the strong agreements that we had that would now see the return of those airlines, Emirates and Etihad, and the visa regime changes and reviews. All of these things are very, very reassuring. They tell us that, we are on to a new chapter in our foreign policy, especially in the area of economic diplomacy. I'm sure that the confidence, that investors have in Nigeria will be boosted by the interventions and engagements that our president has had together with members of his government and the top Nigerian business people. Don't also forget that this visit, especially to India, afforded the opportunity for the president to meet with the Nigerian community, where he again re-emphasized the centrality of the diaspora to Nigeria's economic regeneration. And he had the most inspiring address there. I remember he talked about the fact that, you know, the opportunities are endless and infinite. And he used his own humble beginnings. There's nothing he hasn't done. And he fired the imaginations, you know, of the Nigerians, you know, who were gathered in Delhi, you know, to say that the Nigerian can-do spirit is what everyone requires to get the world's attention again. So all together, I think that there are great benefits and advantages that have come, especially in the area of strengthening our economic capacities and our investment capacities, and that the dividends will begin to come. I think, you know, the president, you know, has had at the center of the initiatives the fact that we need to very quickly get our economy back to its productive best. You know, without productivity, we would, you know, not meet those targets that we have. Most of all, I would say that the presence of Nigeria and many other global South, you know, powers, you know, helped to shape the agenda that you found in the communique that was issued from that meeting in India. The commitment to accelerating the implementation of the SDGs, for instance, the strengthening of the multilateral financial institutions and banks and the access to that, the soft, you know, approaches that, you know, the body now calls for in addressing vulnerable debt, you know, debt-hanging countries. But most of all, the commitments that, you know, the world will now, through the G20 and bodies like that, look at issues of climate change and the adversities that come with that change.
Well, Professor, according to a statement from the presidency following his visit to the G20 summit, the president met with U.S. President Joe Biden, of course, on the sidelines of the summit, and even the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. In fact, the statement says the German Chancellor will be visiting Nigeria in October. Now, what are your expectations of that visit?
Well, those are going to be continuations of the beginnings that have been laid. Remember that, you know, our country is on the path, you know, of a new chapter in not just our domestic, you know, affairs, but also our external relations. So this is the time that we have a lot of goodwill, you know, being Africa's giant, being Africa's biggest economy, being Africa's leader. You know, the whole world is looking up to Nigeria to help not only provide leadership, but also help to stabilize the continent. A lot of things haven't gone quite as well as the world would expect. The most recent being, of course, the unfortunate recessions that we've had in a few countries in West Africa and other parts of Africa. So it is a time for new alignments, the strengthening of existing alignments, all that you might call the resetting, you know, of the basis for getting to do the kinds of things that the world expects at this time. So President Biden, very reassuring. The German Chancellor coming in October. These are very reassuring things. And these are the kinds of things that, you know, boost investor confidence in a country like Nigeria, showing very clearly that we're on the right track.
All right, Professor. And much is to be said about garnering and maintaining those international alliances. But I do want to play devil's advocate for just a second, because there are some critics who, while applauding President Tinubu's moves in the international scene, worry that it distracts from the moves on the local scene. Few are under the impression that in order to be taken seriously on an international stage, the local stage has to be somewhat in order. But then there's the other side of the coin where people say, hey, locally things are not going so well. It does not stop individuals and countries from trying to forge alliances with other international bodies, regardless of the mess that they have at home. What's your opinion?
No, well, very clearly, the domestic and the external are so closely connected that it is difficult to consider anyone in isolation of the other. In fact, if anything, they are mutually reinforcing. And what we have seen today is whether you discuss issues of the removal of subsidies, or you discuss issues of external debt, or you talk about infrastructural regeneration and so on, all of these things have external dimensions. For instance, it's clear to everyone that we cannot rebuild our economy. We cannot get our economy to begin to drive at higher capacities if we don't have external people coming in. So we need all the support externally. People talk about issues of insecurity and so on. Now, today, the issues of insecurity are not issues that are bounded by, national territories alone. These things are transnational in character. Investment is transnational. The kinds of things that have gone on, even using digital means and the cyberspace, mean that the internal and the external are very strongly bound together. And as I say, they are so mutually reinforcing that everything that we garner from outside would have its resonance at home. So I think that in the past, when people used to think of the sequencing in terms of you must be strong at home to be able to be strong outside, now means you must be both strong at home and strong outside. But to be strong at home, you need a strong external support, and to be strong outside, you need a strong domestic environment. So the connections are very obvious, and I think that the critics would have to wait a little more to see the dividends of the external engagements that we've had. And I have no doubt at all that in only 3 months we are counting the many successes of the kind that we are referring to. So in another 3 months, I'm sure that we'll all be saying, oh, thank God, we are getting to new heights.
Well, Professor, regarding the president's visit to the UAE, a statement, from the presidency says the UAE has lifted the visa ban on Nigerians and that Emirates and Etihad Airlines will resume flights in and out of Nigeria. But some analysts are worried that the UAE's official news agency, that's the Emirate News Agency, was silent, on these two issues. So should we be worried, perhaps, that some form of miscommunication regarding the outcome of that meeting has occurred?
I would not be worried at all, because, we have reports emanating from the discussions and the agreements, that have taken place. At the appropriate time, we expect that, the Emirates media organizations would relate the same things. So I'm not worried at all. We've had this going on 2 days and more. If there were going to be any other perspectives or other reports and so on, by now we would have had them. So I'm not worried at all.
All right, and going forward, what should Nigeria, President Tinubu and the international diplomatic community, what should they be looking to gain for Nigeria in the future? We've already established some pretty strong economic ties. What else is in the pipelines?
Well, at a time like this, we are in a very turbulent period, in global politics. And, we are looking for anchors and pillars that would help to give some coherence to the system, the global system, that is. At the level of individual countries, you need the kinds of leadership that countries like Nigeria, like India, like Brazil, are able to provide. And so it's a good thing that Nigeria is re-emerging in such strong ways at this time. So the world definitely would be looking the way of Nigeria for such stability. But Nigeria is also a strong advocate of multilateralism. It's a time to recalibrate those major multilateral platforms. The United Nations, in particular, the Global South has been, at the vanguard of asking for reforms, of that major world body. We have the WTO, we have the IMF, we have the World Bank, we have the G20, and all of these bodies, need to be strengthened. The world cannot, be held back by superpower tensions and rivalries only. We need to build consensus as a key point. We need to build more inclusive and more equitable frameworks and agendas for global politics. So it is just as well that the world acknowledges Nigeria's preeminence as a West African, as an African and a global South leader. And the world is waiting for Nigeria, to take its rightful place in helping to stabilize a turbulent world.
Now, Professor, I'd like to get your take on the significance of the African Union being made a permanent member of the G20. Can the AU actually represent the interest of the entire continent in that grouping, or should individual African countries also be looking towards becoming members?
Well, we already have the example of the EU and the individual membership of, several European countries in the G20. We have South Africa already in the G20. The AU represents all of Africa's 55 countries. I think the point is about the leverage, that you have when 55 countries come together. The challenge, of course, is to see how we can, as AU, shape and get our consensus building together so that the AU can effectively represent Africa. But know that, through the free trade agreement, for instance, the continental one, AU is not simply just a political organization only. AU is now also the umbrella for a strong African Economic Union. The challenge would always be to build the African consensus so that we know that our representation is there. But just as the EU has not stopped individual membership of European countries, we expect that countries like Nigeria and maybe one or two other African countries would be admitted to the G20.
All right, and how will this Forex shortage that the country is currently going through, how could it affect the planned foreign investments that should be hitting our shores soon?
Well, I'm sure elementary economics tells us that if we don't build our productive capacities, if we don't have, the kinds of things that will make us strong economically within, will continue to suffer, the crisis of foreign exchange in ways in which we have. The foreign reserves that we have would be a function of our total volume, of resources and productive resources within the country. So I think, the regeneration of our productive capacities is the most direct way, of overcoming this crisis. And, direct investments from outside would be part of that, that approach that I think we are already beginning to build.
Now, Professor, the UAE is also expected to invest several $billion in defense and agricultural sectors in Nigeria. But I'm just wondering if this is a sign, perhaps, that the Middle East is also seeking, maybe, to break the dominance of US, China, and Russia in Africa.
Well, that's one way to look at it. I mean, sometimes when we talk about these forms of investment, I'm reminded, that Nigerians also have huge investments outside of Nigeria. In the UAE itself, we have quite a sizable Nigerian segment, of that economy. Might not be into the billions that you mentioned and so on. But, it's the balance, it's the reciprocity, it's the fact that, the bilaterals are very strong between, say, Nigeria and the UAE. And there's so much room for everyone, that, the UAE recognizes that it's also in competition, with other economic powers in the world. And Nigeria is an investor's delight. And so if there are opportunities on offer, why not use them? If that then positions the UAE ahead of other, traditional investors in Nigeria, so be it. The UAE is also putting his money where his mouth is, and that's what every strategic, country, strategically thinking country should do. You put your money where your mouth is. The world is a world of opportunities, and it's a liberal economy that has that drives the global political economy. So why not? UAE is not the only one looking the way of Nigeria. From the meetings in Delhi and so on, we now have assurances, of more Indian participation in Nigeria. The Germans are also going to come and so on. So it's the time, it just shows that Nigeria is viable, that Nigeria, is a place where you can have not only investment, but also the confidence that builds that investment. This will then have its own implications for how we do business in our country, things about ease of doing business and so on. But all of these are elements of the competitiveness of the global political economy.
All right, Professor, and your final word on some of the critics who have called these visits global picnics and a photo opportunity for some of our leaders to take pictures and cozy up to the foreigners and foreign delegates in other countries in order to pacify their portfolio. What is your take on that?
I guess the same will be said of other world leaders that are permanently on the move. What these leaders are doing is actually to look for greener pastures all over. The social media, has given the appearance, of jamborees, because the photographs that we used to see once in a while before the social media explosion came on board, we now see, and there are all kinds of, things that are going on. But those ones, should not detract from the primary focus. No president, embarks on a jamboree just to go to take photographs. No president, goes about looking for other presidents to sit with and so on and have tea and all of those things. This is serious business. And, whether in India or in the UAE or in a few days from now at the UN General Assembly, these are useful and critical platforms for reaching out to the world. The world cannot come to meet us in Nigeria all the time. We have to go out to reach the world. I think the president is fully on track in this
Professor
area.
Eghosa Osaghae, DG, NIA, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.